You wake up and nothing feels right. The things that used to make you happy now feel empty. You smile at the right times, say the right words, but inside, there's just silence. Carl Jung called this the most dangerous psychological state a person can reach. Not depression, not burnout. Something far more terrifying. And if you're feeling this right now, your soul is screaming for you to pay attention. Here's what most people don't understand about losing joy. It's not that life became harder or that circumstances changed for the worse. The real problem runs much deeper than that. Jung discovered that when people lose their ability to feel genuine happiness, they're not broken. They're experiencing what he called the collapse of the false self. And this collapse always happens for a very specific reason. Let me show you what Jung discovered. Jung's clinical notes from 1913 reveal something disturbing. Patient after patient came to his office describing the same emptiness. Successful people, good people, people who had done everything right according to society's rules, and they all felt nothing. One patient told Jung she had the perfect life on paper, loving husband, beautiful children, respected career. But when Jung asked what brought her joy, she went silent. Not because she couldn't think of anything, but because she realized she'd been performing happiness for so long that she'd lost contact with what genuine joy even felt like. Jung called this the persona trap. The persona is your social mask, the carefully constructed image you present to the world. It's the version of you that knows exactly what to say in every situation, how to behave at every gathering, what emotions are acceptable to display and which ones must be hidden. You build this perfect image of who you're supposed to be, the reliable employee who never complains about overtime, the devoted parent who sacrifices everything without resentment, the strong friend who always has energy for everyone else's problems, the positive person who never brings the mood down. And you invest all your psychological energy into maintaining that flawless mask. At first, the persona serves a useful function. It helps you navigate social situations. It protects vulnerable parts of yourself. It allows you to function in environments that might not be safe for complete authenticity. Jung never said the persona was bad. He said the danger comes when you completely identify with it. Here's where it gets dangerous. Every moment you spend maintaining your perfect image is a moment you're not living authentically. Every time you perform the appropriate emotion instead of feeling your real emotion, you distance yourself further from your genuine self. Every time you say what people want to hear instead of what you actually think, you betray your own inner truth. You're performing life instead of experiencing it. You go through the motions with technical perfection. You hit all the right marks. You say all the correct things. You display all the appropriate reactions. But nothing lands emotionally because the real you isn't there to receive it. Think about the last time someone complimented you. Did you feel genuine warmth, or did you immediately perform gratitude while feeling nothing inside? Think about the last celebration you attended. Were you present in the joy, or were you monitoring your own behavior to make sure you were celebrating correctly? This is why nothing brings you joy anymore. Not because there's nothing joyful in the world, not because you're incapable of happiness, but because you've trained yourself to experience life through a filter of what you should feel rather than what you actually feel. You've become a spectator in your own existence, watching yourself perform the role of someone who feels things. Jung observed that his persona-identified patients described life as feeling muted, like watching everything happen behind glass. They could see joy happening around them. They understood intellectually that certain experiences should make them happy, but they couldn't access the feeling because they'd buried their authentic emotional self so deep beneath the performance that they'd lost contact with it entirely. And that hollow feeling you can't shake, that persistent emptiness that no achievement fills, no relationship satisfies, no purchase remedies, That's your authentic self suffocating under layers of performance. That's your soul refusing to participate in a life that isn't real. That's your psyche staging a rebellion against the prison you've built around your true nature. The most painful part? You did this to survive. You learned early that certain parts of you weren't acceptable, that certain emotions caused problems, that certain truths made people uncomfortable. So you hid those parts, you performed the acceptable version, and it worked, until it stopped working, until the cost of the performance became greater than the cost of being rejected for who you really are. But the persona collapse isn't the whole story. Jung discovered something even more disturbing about why people lose their capacity for joy. He called it the unlived life, and it explains why so many people feel like they're dying inside while technically still alive. Every time you deny a part of yourself to maintain your acceptable image, that denied energy doesn't disappear. It doesn't evaporate or dissolve or cease to exist. It accumulates in what Jung called the shadow. All the anger you couldn't express, because good people don't get angry. Empaths aren't broken, they're alchemists in progress. The alchemist's path gives you drills, Jung-based boundaries, and 3 exclusive chapter videos to turn overwhelm into clarity. By Surreal Mind, 236-page downloadable ebook, in stock. Begin now at thesurrealmind.com. All the selfishness you had to hide because caring people put others first. All the desires you learned to suppress because wanting things for yourself was shameful. All the boundaries you never set because saying no makes you difficult. They're still there. Every single denied impulse, every suppressed emotion, every authentic reaction you replaced with an acceptable performance. All of it is still inside you, consuming the very energy that should be fueling your joy. Jung observed that his most joyless patients had one thing in common. They were all convinced they were good people. Not just good, but purely good. They'd successfully hidden every quality they thought was unacceptable. They'd buried their shadow so deep that they genuinely believed they didn't have one. They looked at angry people with confusion. They watched selfish people with judgment. They encountered difficult people with self-righteous superiority. The problem? That hidden darkness was now controlling them from the unconscious. Jung discovered that the shadow you deny doesn't go away. It goes underground. And from there, it runs your life in ways you can't see. Here's how it manifests. You see someone living freely, and it triggers rage you don't understand. Where did that anger come from? It came from your own denied desire for freedom. You watch others pursue their desires and feel inexplicable resentment. Why do you care what they do? Because they're living the life you told yourself you couldn't have. You encounter people who express emotions openly, and you judge them as unstable, dramatic, or attention-seeking. Why does their expression bother you so much? Because you had to silence your own. Jung realized these reactions weren't about the other person at all. They were about the parts of yourself you'd exiled. Every judgment you make is a confession. Every criticism you voice reveals what you've forbidden in yourself. Every person who irritates you is showing you something you've refused to integrate. This creates what Jung called projection. You expend massive psychological energy seeing in others what you can't accept in yourself. You become obsessed with other people's flaws while remaining blind to your own patterns. You create enemies out of mirrors. You feel drained by people who are actually just reflecting back the qualities you've disowned. And here's the truly exhausting part. You get trapped in what Jung documented as the repetition compulsion. You unconsciously recreate the same painful situations over and over. The same type of relationship that disappoints you. The same work environment that exploits you. The same friendship dynamic that leaves you feeling used. You keep believing you're a victim of circumstance. You keep thinking you're just unlucky. You keep telling yourself that next time will be different. but you never recognize that you're the unconscious architect of your recurring suffering. You're recreating these patterns because your shadow is trying to get your attention. It's trying to show you what you need to integrate. This cycle consumes the energy that should be creating joy. Instead of experiencing life, you're stuck in an endless loop of unconscious repetition. Instead of growing, you're treading water in the same pool of unresolved psychological material. And every cycle leaves you more depleted, more disconnected, more convinced that joy is something other people get to experience, but somehow isn't available to you. Jung identified a third factor that destroys joy, and this one might be the most important for understanding your current state. Some people don't just feel empty, they feel existentially exhausted, drained by simply existing around others, depleted by social situations that seem to energize everyone else. Jung called this differentiated perception, and it's far more common than most people realize. These individuals possess what Jung described as heightened pattern recognition. They don't just hear what people say, they sense what people mean. They detect the gap between words and intentions. They notice the micro-expressions that reveal hidden emotions. They feel the tension in the room that everyone else is pretending doesn't exist. They don't just see behavior, they detect the unconscious motivations behind every action. They understand why someone is really angry. They recognize manipulation before it's fully formed. They sense neediness disguised as generosity. They feel danger in situations that look completely safe to others. They walk into rooms and immediately feel the emotional atmosphere that everyone else is either oblivious to or has agreed to ignore. They pick up on family dynamics within minutes. They recognize toxic relationship patterns on first observation. They can predict how situations will unfold because they see the psychological forces in motion. Jung wrote that this ability creates profound psychological isolation. When you see clearly what others cannot or will not see, you become what he called a mirror that society cannot bear to look into. People feel exposed around you even when you say nothing. They sense that you see through their masks, their performances, their carefully constructed images, and they respond with unconscious hostility. They call you negative for pointing out obvious problems. They label you judgmental for noticing patterns. They accuse you of overthinking when you're simply thinking. They tell you you're too sensitive when you're actually accurately sensitive. They gaslight you into doubting your own perceptions because your clarity threatens their illusions. But here's what makes this state truly devastating for joy. You can't participate in collective happiness when you see the lies underlying it. You watch people laugh at surface pleasantries while sensing their hidden desperation. You observe celebrations while feeling the unspoken tensions everyone has agreed to ignore. You attend gatherings where everyone is performing connection while you feel the profound disconnection underneath. You're surrounded by people, but living in a different reality. They're responding to what's being said and done. You're responding to what's actually happening beneath the surface. They can enjoy the party because they don't feel the hostility between the hosts. You can't relax because you're absorbing the unspoken conflict everyone else is pretending isn't there. Jung documented what happens next, and this is where the mechanism that destroys joy becomes truly insidious. The perceptive person starts absorbing everyone else's unconscious content. They don't just observe other people's pain. They feel it in their own body. They don't just understand other people's trauma. They carry it as if it's their own. They lose contact with their own authentic feelings because they're drowning in psychological material that doesn't belong to them. They wake up anxious and can't identify why until they realize they're carrying their partner's work stress. They feel depressed and don't understand it until they recognize they've absorbed their parents' unprocessed grief. They experience rage that isn't theirs, fear that belongs to someone else, shame they inherited from the family system. Jung called this participation mystique. the psychological state where boundaries between self and other dissolve. You become so merged with collective emotional states that you can't distinguish your own inner experience anymore. You feel everything, but can't identify what feelings actually belong to you. You sense everyone's needs, but lose contact with your own desires. If you don't know who you are separate from everyone else, if you can't distinguish your feelings from absorbed emotions, if you've lost contact with your authentic inner experience, how can you possibly know what brings you joy? You can't, because joy requires presence. It requires you to be there in your own experience, feeling your own feelings, and you're not there. You're scattered across everyone else's psychological landscape, holding their pain, carrying their burden, losing yourself in the process. Now we've reached the breaking point. The moment Jung called the terrifying transformation. The crisis point where everything you've been desperately holding together starts to crack and crumble. Your perfect persona can't be maintained anymore. The mask becomes too heavy to wear. The performance becomes too exhausting to sustain. You've spent years, maybe decades, saying yes when you meant no, smiling when you felt empty, pretending to care about things that meant nothing to you, showing up for people who never showed up for you, performing enthusiasm for achievements that felt hollow. And suddenly, your psychological system simply can't sustain the contradiction anymore. The gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are becomes too wide to bridge. Every interaction requires more energy than you have. Every social obligation feels like an impossible demand. Every expectation placed on you triggers something close to desperation. You start canceling plans, withdrawing from relationships, avoiding situations where you'll have to perform, because you literally don't have the energy to be the person everyone expects anymore. Your shadow, denied for so long, starts erupting in ways you can't control. You have thoughts that horrify you. Where is this darkness coming from? You experience urges you don't recognize as yours. Who is this person thinking these things? You feel rage at people who don't deserve it, or at least not the intensity you're feeling. You snap at minor annoyances. You fantasize about burning your entire life down. You think things you never thought you were capable of thinking. Or worse, you experience complete numbness, where you know you should feel something. Someone shares good news, and you feel nothing. Someone you love is hurting, and you can't access compassion. Something objectively terrible happens, and you just feel blank. The numbness is sometimes more frightening than the dark thoughts because at least the rage confirms you're still alive. Your differentiated perception reaches complete overload. You've absorbed so much pain from others that you've become a psychological dumping ground. You feel everyone's suffering, but none of your own desires. You understand everyone's wounds, but can't access your own needs. You can articulate exactly what everyone else should do to heal, but you have no idea how to help yourself. You're drowning in emotional information that doesn't belong to you while having no connection to your own authentic experience. You know everything about everyone else and nothing about yourself. You can guide others toward joy while having no access to your own. This is what Jung called the clarity event, the moment when your pattern recognition finally overwhelms your need to believe the best in people and maintain the pleasant illusions that make social life possible. You see the truth about your relationships, and the truth is devastating. You see the truth about your choices, and the truth is painful. You see the truth about your entire life structure, and the truth is that almost none of it is actually yours. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. This isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. This moment of crisis isn't failure. It's your psyche's desperate attempt to force you back to authenticity, to demand that you stop performing and start living, to insist that you reclaim the parts of yourself you abandoned to be acceptable. Joy returns through what Jung called individuation, not by finding new things to make you happy, not by changing your circumstances, not by achieving more or acquiring more or becoming more, but by reclaiming the parts of yourself you abandoned to maintain your acceptable image, by integrating what you've denied, by becoming whole instead of staying fragmented. The first step Jung identified is differentiation. You must learn to recognize what actually belongs to you versus what you've absorbed from others. This requires brutal honesty and consistent practice. When you feel empty, you must pause and ask yourself, is this my emptiness, or am I carrying someone else's despair? When you feel anxious, you must investigate, is this my anxiety, or did I absorb it from the environment I'm in? When you feel angry, you must question, is this my anger about my own boundaries being violated, or am I holding rage that belongs to a relationship I'm witnessing, a family system I'm embedded in, or a workplace culture I'm swimming in? Jung taught his patients to spend time in complete solitude daily, not scrolling through other people's lives, not consuming other people's thoughts through media, not filling the silence with noise, just sitting with themselves until the absorbed psychological material settled like sediment in water, and they could finally hear their own authentic voice again beneath all the noise. This is how you establish boundaries between self and other. This is how you learn to distinguish your experience from absorbed experience. This is how you reclaim your psychological space. And this practice isn't optional if you want joy back. Because joy requires knowing what you actually want, and you can't know what you want if you can't distinguish your desires from everyone else's expectations. The second step is shadow integration. You must acknowledge that you contain every human quality you see in others. The capacity for selfishness, the potential for cruelty, the possibility of manipulation, the tendency toward weakness, the ability to lie, the inclination to quit, not to become these things or act on these impulses, but to accept that you're complete, not purely good. Jung wrote that this acceptance doesn't make you a bad person. It makes you a whole person. It makes you human instead of trying to be an angel. It allows you to see clearly without judgment because you recognize that you're not fundamentally different from anyone else. You're just aware of qualities in yourself that others are still denying. When you integrate your shadow, something remarkable happens. You stop projecting. You stop exhausting yourself by seeing your denied qualities in everyone around you. You stop getting triggered by other people's behavior because you've made peace with those same tendencies in yourself. You stop creating enemies out of mirrors because you've befriended the parts of yourself you used to hate. This frees up massive amounts of psychological energy. All the energy you were spending on denial, on projection, on judgment, on maintaining the illusion of purity becomes available for actual living. That energy can now fuel genuine experience instead of psychological defense. That energy can create joy instead of managing shame. The third step is what Jung called conscious participation. You use your perception in service of the whole, but with boundaries. You help others without absorbing their pain. You see clearly without taking responsibility for fixing everyone. You offer your gifts strategically rather than depleting yourself through indiscriminate empathy. You become what Jung called selectively empathetic. You don't lose your capacity for deep feeling. You don't become cold or disconnected or uncaring. You simply become conscious about where your energy flows. You choose who gets access to your deepest care. You protect your psychological space while still engaging meaningfully with others. Jung documented that when people completed this process, something surprising happened. Joy didn't return because they found something new to be happy about. Joy didn't return because their circumstances improved. Joy didn't return because they achieved something or acquired something or became someone different. Joy returned because they were finally present to experience life directly rather than through the filter of who they should be. They were finally in their own body, feeling their own feelings, living their own life. They became capable of genuine experience because the real them was finally there to have the experience. They could feel happiness when good things happened because they weren't performing happiness for an audience. They could feel peace in quiet moments because they weren't monitoring themselves for acceptable responses. They could feel excitement about their own desires because they'd stopped abandoning their wants for everyone else's needs. Your lack of joy isn't a character flaw. It's not a chemical imbalance that needs medication. It's not a personal failing that requires you to try harder or think more positively. It's your soul refusing to participate in a life that isn't yours. The emptiness is a message. The numbness is information. Your psyche is telling you that performing the acceptable version of yourself is killing the real you. Jung spent his entire career proving that the path back to joy requires radical authenticity. Stop maintaining the perfect image. Stop performing emotions you don't feel. Stop absorbing everyone else's pain while ignoring your own needs. Stop living the life you think you should want and start discovering what you actually want. The real you is still there, buried under years of conditioning and performance and absorption of other people's expectations. And that authentic self knows exactly what brings it joy. You just have to stop lying long enough to listen. If this resonates with you, share your experience in the comments below and subscribe for more insights into Jung's psychology that can transform your relationship with yourself. In The Alchemist's Path, perception training for empaths, you'll turn overwhelm into wisdom with practical drills, Jung-inspired boundaries, and step-by-step perception training. This guide includes 3 exclusive chapter videos to deepen each lesson. Written by Surreal Mind, 236 pages, beautifully designed 8.5 by 11 downloadable ebook, in stock now. Start your training today. Feel deeply while thinking clearly. Get The Alchemist's Path at thesurrealmind.com. Thanks for watching. See you in the next dimension.